Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of PHS Talks, a series of virtual presentations on historical subjects produced by the Peterborough Historical Society. Today, we welcome as our speaker Robert Clarke, a retired editor and local historian of popular culture. Rob grew up in Peterborough and, like all of us of a certain age, remembers going to the movies as an important part of youthful life. He has a special interest in the social context of moviegoing and of the many buildings that created a magical atmosphere of escape. Here, he focuses on early moviegoing and Peterborough's theaters. Welcome, Robert Clarke.
Thanks, Dale, and I want to thank the Peterborough Historical Society for giving me a chance to tell you about the research and writing I've been doing over the past number of years. The Society has to be congratulated for adjusting to the pandemic by putting its monthly talks on a supremely well-distanced YouTube. Now, the working title of my project is Packed to the Doors, The Electric City Goes to the Movies. And frankly, I've been having a great deal of fun collecting info and images wherever I can find them and getting lots of help with that. I love all the photos we have of the George Street theaters, including this busy view from the 1930s, looking north with the Capitol on the side. And I love the movie ads, like these ones from 1923. I'm going to talk here about how this project got started, including my own early experiences, take a quick trip through some of the theaters with a bit about audience and people who worked in the business. With the pandemic, of course, we were forced to do our movie watching pretty much entirely at home, though in the past couple of years, thanks to digital technology, that has become something of a norm in any case. I'm looking back, perhaps a little romantically, at when we were actually quite able to go out regularly to movie theaters on a consistent basis. Why am I so interested in this history, this mix of movie-going and the local? Maybe a New Yorker cartoon gives a bit of a clue. I like living in the past. It's where I grew up. Well, I grew up in Peterborough, and I grew up going to movies in Peterborough. For my parents, it was a relatively cheap family outing, and I have distinct memories of movie-going from an early age. In the 1950s, when I was growing up, Peterborough had a vibrant movie theater row stretching along George Street, including the Paramount, Odeon, and the Capitol, with their great marquees pointing out here on the right. But that's not all. On the next block up George Street, between Charlotte and Simcoe, there was the Centre Theatre. This is a shot of the Centre from June 1944. Appliances, shoes, and a movie theatre. The newsreel was a big attraction, and if you look closely, you can see the nuttery tucked in beside the theatre, where those people are standing out front on the sidewalk. This was before Peterborough theaters had refreshment booths with bags of popcorn and soft drinks and candy. People would grab treats at the nuttery before going into the theater. In the Globe and Mail recently, columnist Kathleen McCarthy wrote, "Moviegoing is the proletarian public cultural experience." In the late 1940s and early 50s, adult tickets usually sold for 40 or 50 cents a person, depending on the movie, and children's tickets for much less. Movies changed twice a week. There was always something new to see. In those days, you'd go into the theater at any old time without paying much attention to when the films were starting. There were ushers with flashlights to help you find a seat in the dark. You would stay through the whole program and leave when you came around to the familiar scene that had been playing when you arrived. That accounts for the phrase, "This is where we came in." The program included one or two features, a newsreel, cartoon, and short subject. For almost 30 years on Hunter Street, we had the Regent, 1920 to 1949, shown here with a parade passing by in 1941. And in a shot from 1947, there's a restaurant there now. Recently, I found a showing of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer at the center in March 1951, even though it was an old film from 1938. At the time it came, I was not quite 7, but I've always remembered seeing it. I don't remember, I'm happy to say, Africa screams. I'm certain it was not about decolonization. I mentioned Tom Sawyer in particular because I also spotted a rerun of Adventures of Robin Hood at the center shortly after. The Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland, also released in 1938. It showed just 4 or 5 days after Tom Sawyer. I've always remembered seeing that too. Unfortunately, I have no memory of the Bandit Queen with the dangerous kisses. This is just to say that it seems we went a lot. When I got older, I'd go most Saturday afternoons. My mother would give me 25 cents, 15 cents to get in and 10 cents for popcorn. No drink. I fell in love with movies early on. I guess I loved all the places a movie took you to that seemed just a little more exciting than the streets of Peterborough. So, fast forward. This particular project had its origins in Peterborough's annual Reframe Film Festival. In 2014, I was on a committee that put together a special exhibit for the festival's 10th anniversary. The original idea was to look at past events and celebrate them as much as the current festival. The exhibit was set up in the Turner Building, which as it happened was practically in line with or attached to that old theater row of the 1950s. For the exhibit, I thought it might be nice to find out just when the first movie was shown in Peterborough. Then I decided to find out when the first theater opened. It took off from there. Movie history details found scarce was a strange headline in the Examiner, June 1949. Things in this field have certainly changed a lot since then. Now there's probably far too many movie history details. Undaunted, I've collected file after file of information and images relating to the local scene. I've done a kind of reconnaissance of the early exhibition sites in the city. I've seen how ownership shifted from the local to the corporate, with Hollywood, that almost generic place that delivers our film, transformed into a modern business enterprise. So now, let's go back to the beginning, January 1897. When the first motion picture screening in Peterborough took place, the pioneering Lumiere Brothers Cinematograph. It was a huge deal. It was at Bradburns Opera House on George Street, a massive public structure that, like the Centre Theatre, is no longer with us, demolished in the 1970s to make way for Peterborough Square. Bradburns Opera House, as it appeared in an 1887 booklet. It was pretty grand. The clock you see on the top of this image was moved very early on to sit on the market hall next door, so at least we still have it. Amazingly, the hall where this first motion picture was screened was still in place in 1969, not long before the building was torn down. That's when this photo was taken. Hard to believe, but a young Winston Churchill once stood on that stage. Big crowds turned out over 6 days to view the films of the Cinematograph. An Examiner reporter stated, "Every view was a reproduction of a scene to the life and was liberally applauded. The father feeding his child at the breakfast table, and the babies in the nursery were like all the others, exactly lifelike. It is no mere magic lantern exhibition, but perfect photographs endowed with life." Another account cited a scene with a cloud of dust in the distance and a squadron of French cuirassiers who, and I'll quote, "came into view, each moment more distinctly. Closer they come, charging furiously, and the scene looking and being as near life as stirring reality. The horses coming so near that they appear about to rush upon the spectators." This is a tiny glimpse of what a Peterborough audience saw in the first motion pictures to be shown in town. After that, Peterborough had traveling motion pictures coming regularly, staying only a day or two. Shepard's moving pictures came in 1906, but it was not until January 1907 that what can be called the city's first theater dedicated to showing moving pictures was established. That was a place called Scott's Coliseum on the east side of George Street below Brock. It opened on January 30th, 1907. Scott's Coliseum coming to the city, citizens to enjoy winter attraction. And there's a motto right there to start off. To entertain and amuse is good, to do both and instruct is better. That seems an apt motto to apply to the history of moviegoing in general, though probably far from always holding true. The building that housed the Coliseum is still there and has a historical designation. For years it was home to Christensen's Fine Arts, now it's a bike shop. Scott's Coliseum was what was called a nickel-odeon. Price of entry was 5 cents. It was short-lived, around for only about 6 or 7 months. Its owner was a man then living in Toronto, George Scott, and I found that he is an incredible story unto himself. He made what is sometimes referred to as the first motion picture shot in Toronto, a film of the Great Toronto Fire of 1904. He later traveled the world making pictures, South Pacific, Australia, Southeast Asia, and Japan, for instance, and this was in the 1910s. This is a 1913 ad for one of the films made on that trip. It's quite amazing, I think, long before 2001, when Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, was despoiling a temple in Angkor Wat, Cambodia, George Scott was there as a cameraman, helping to shoot what is said to be the first surviving film of the complex. Also about robbery on the site. Scott ended up in Hollywood, working as a cameraman with the iconic director John Ford, among others. And here he was in Peterborough in 1907 and staying in the Monroe House for $1 a night. Scott's Coliseum was quickly succeeded by others, all with names typical of the theaters of the time. Wonderland opened in July 1907 and was also short-lived, lasting only until March of the following year. The Crystal, my favorite name, this particular site, roughly just across from where Pappas Billiards is today, remained as a motion picture theater until 1920. With a couple of name changes. The building is still there today too. Other theaters followed in quick succession. The Royal, 1908, the Princess, 1909, the Empire, 1914, the Regent, 1920, and the Capitol, 1921. Let's take a quick look at the Princess. This is the only image I've seen of the Princess, and here it is just barely in the picture and out of focus to the right, with 3 straight racers about to set off for Ennismore in June 1911. The man on the left is the well-known local Indigenous runner Albert Smoke, who won the race. Here's a detail from that larger photo. You can see the makeshift banner announcing the main film of the day. Oddly enough, and this helps indicate the contradictions and incongruities of film exhibition history, well, Albert Smoke was out there lining up on the street. The film that day was The Red Man's Gratitude. This is roughly the same spot over 100 years later. The name of the Princess changed to the more unusual Tizet in 1915, and it closed in 1917. After that, the space housed a series of restaurants, the Paris Café, High Tops, and now the Real Thai Cuisine. In a short period in the 1910s then, Peterborough had 5 lively motion picture theaters operating downtown, all of them doing brisk business. All of them except one were on George Street. The exception was the Empire on Charlotte. There is an unpaved and not very busy parking lot there today where once was an Empire. These motion picture theaters were all on bustling streets concentrated in 3 or 4 downtown blocks. There was lots of pedestrian street traffic, men off work, women shopping, women with children, store clerks, female and male, office workers, and even farmers in town for the day or for the Saturday market. They would all be wandering around and maybe stop in for a short time, paying their 5 or 10 cents to see what was playing. As the ad said, "Come when you like and stay as long as you like." The early theaters were small, varying from about 200 seats to the largest, the Royal and Empire, at about 500 seats. In fact, overcrowding was a recurring problem. More than once in the 1910s, overcrowding and packed aisles and people jamming the street outside led to police visits, followed by court sessions a day or two later. In addition, the huge Grand Opera House, shown here, with 3 floors and about 1,500 seats, also regularly screened motion pictures, along with lavish live productions. I've counted 27 motion picture theaters in the years from 1897 to now, 124 years, including 2 drive-ins and 4 repertory cinemas. That takes us right up to the galaxy. Over the years, we've had film societies, film councils, film festivals. The first film festival I was surprised to find in 1950. Movies in churches and school auditoriums, and always lots of outdoor motion pictures. What all of this activity adds up to, for me, is a vibrant, diverse, and continuing history of watching moving pictures whenever and wherever possible. But as I was finding out about where movies were shown, I also became even more fascinated by glimpses of the audiences and the people involved. Audiences had to learn how to go to movies. Men received a special request not to expectorate. Women faced complaints regarding their very large hats. If you've been to a movie at the Galaxy recently, you'll know we also have to sit through a short notice telling us how to behave. Don't be a Tommy Texter. As for the people involved in motion picture exhibition, I only have time here to mention a few. Most of the early owners and managers, unlike George Scott, were local. Because motion picture exhibition was such a new thing in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the owners and managers came from quite interesting, unexpected backgrounds, like a blacksmith, a cigar store merchant, a veterinarian, or jewelry store owners. The longtime owner of the Peterborough Examiner, Roland Glover, dabbled in theaters at least 3 times from the 1900s to the 1930s. Around 1904, a Greek immigrant who came to be known as Mike Pappas, a distant relative of Peterborough's Dean Pappas, opened a George Street tobacco shop combined with a pool room, shoe shining, and shooting gallery. He quickly became one of the first and most successful and long-lasting theater entrepreneurs in Peterborough, and eventually a bit of a mystery. Pappas left the city in the late 1920s, moving to Toronto, and shortly after that disappearing from sight. About 20 years later, he popped up once again in the local news. A sad story. In 1947, at age 70, the once enormously wealthy Pappas turned up in Peterborough with no place to stay and apparently no money, and was charged with vagrancy. He was held for a little while in the police station on what was then Market Square. The newspaper writer described how Pappas could look out the window of the police court and see the back of the theater. It was once the Royal and now the Centre that he had built many years ago. It would have been something very roughly like the view in this photo. Another of my favorite people is Kathleen McCarthy. She left a diary covering several years beginning in December 1905 when she was turning 16 and already holding an office job downtown. The diary entries made clear that she dearly loved going to the silent films of that time and would go whenever possible. What's most important for me, she got a job at the Examiner in 1920, and as the only female reporter was quickly relegated to the women's pages. Not long after that, she began writing motion picture reviews. That makes her a pioneering movie reviewer because that was a very new, almost unheard of job at the time. She reviewed movies regularly until she left the paper in 1937. She went by the pen name of Jeanette. Her first film article, it was unsigned, but I can tell it was surely written by her, was on a serious topic, censorship of the movies. The story of moviegoing is also about another constant, music. And here I've become fascinated by the life of Mrs. Evelyn Foster. Evelyn Foster was a brilliant violinist and pianist, already an accomplished musician before she and her family came to Canada in 1907. She had trained from an early age in London, England. In Canada, around 1909 to 10, she performed at Massey Hall in Toronto. She and her mother, also a fine pianist, got work playing to accompany motion pictures at the Crystal Palace Theatre in downtown Toronto. Mike Pappas spotted them there in the summer of 1910 and immediately invited them to come to Peterborough and play for his theatre. As Evelyn remarked years later, that is how we happened to come here in the first place. Evelyn and her mother, Mrs. Agnes Fenwick, played music to accompany silent films in a number of Peterborough theatres from 1910 until the arrival of the talkies in 1929 made that kind of accompaniment no longer necessary. Evelyn Foster could play whatever kind of music was required, sweet and low when the film's hero and heroine were together, ominous when the villain arrived on the scene, more thrilling music when horses and cowboys raced across the screen. She had to switch on a second's notice from one type of music to another. After all, as one writer put it, it simply wouldn't do to be playing fast dance type music if pictures on the screen suddenly changed to a Bethstead scene. For decades, Peterborough's distinctive theatre row made movies the center of downtown activity. Alongside that, Peterborough's had its outdoor screenings, its independent theatres, repertory theatres, film festivals. Paul Moore, a cinema scholar at Ryerson, tells me how striking it is that the national chains were always sure to anchor a stop in Peterborough. Ellen, Capitol, Odeon, Paramount, and later a Cineplex and a Galaxy. It's a big little city, he says, that always had enough people and wealth to support a thriving scene, but small enough to be centered upon a bustling downtown. That's all, folks. Thank you.